The following program is brought to you by VHB, creating results for our clients and benefits for our communities, and by Fairpoint Communications, Mechanical Services, Inc., and Volk Packaging.
Welcome. My name is Dana Connors. I will be your host today, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to The Bottom Line. It's a program brought to you by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, and in the next half hour, we hope to explore with you, through our guest, some of the issues, some of the challenges, some of the programs and policies, not to mention people as well, at work in our state to help to improve our economy, to advance our lives as well as a livelihood. That's why we call it The Bottom Line. It's my pleasure today to welcome two guests, two people very much at work helping to grow our economy. In our first segment, we're going to be welcoming back a familiar name and a guest that we've had on before, particularly when we talk about our Make in Maine work. The Maine Development Foundation is a real partner of ours as we have looked at issues facing our state and mapping out some of the recommendations that we see to help meet those challenges. My first guest is Ryan Neal. Ryan, welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you with me one more time.
Glad to be here.
Today we're going to shift our attention not to Make in Maine work, but away from that program, and perhaps there's an overlap, if you will, but we want to take a look at the project called Measures of Growth. It's brought to us in your capacity as program director to the Growth Council, but every year now for 20 years. Yep. Been putting out a report that's labeled the Measures of Growth, and our viewers will see the cover at least on the screen. And I want to share some of the findings of that because the intention, as I understand it, is to take a complete perspective of the state's economy. You have chosen 27 indicators that help to shape our economy, to move it forward. Every year you come out, you evaluate our performance against those indicators, and you come out with this report. With that as background, can you give us a sense of what do we find this year in terms of the story that's told by way of those indicators?
Well, the 27 indicators, they don't change dramatically from year to year. We've had a similar number over the last handful of years. This year we actually made progress relative to the benchmark on 8 indicators and lost some ground on 4, and we're essentially unchanged on 11. So we did better on more indicators than we have in years past. We made some progress. And one of the overall messages of the report is that we need to keep doing well the things that we're already doing well. And the areas that we're not doing so well in, we certainly need to address and work to move forward on those.
I'm going to ask you to share with us some of those areas, first of all, that we're doing well. But when you look at, obviously time doesn't allow us to talk about all 27 of them, but you know, certainly there are those that pop to the surface immediately, like per capita income, employment. What are we doing about R&D? What about productivity? What about business starts? I know those are a few, or I believe there are a few. What were the areas that we did well in that we made advancements?
Well, the Growth Council actually assigns gold stars each year to a handful of indicators that the Council thinks are worthy of special attention. This year, those all fell in the environment sector. We have 3 environment indicators in the report: sustainable forest lands, air quality, and water quality. Those each receive gold stars this year, meaning that we're performing very well. And the Council really wanted to draw some attention to our environmental performance. It's something that we value in Maine. It's a strong part of our heritage. And in this day and age, it's an attractant. It's a strong attractant for businesses and people looking for those things.
No question. I mean, you bring to mind something that we grapple with from time to time in the business community. We just completed a strategic report, as you well know, because you participated with us because of our relationship with Maine Development Foundation. And it's very clear from that strategic plan and our survey of businesses that the value that they place on the environment is compatible with their interest in growing the economy. It's not one against the other. it's an expression of value for both. And I think that's sometimes misunderstood, but as you said, it speaks to the quality of place that we so treasure in our state. You mentioned those were the 3 gold stars, but there were actually we gained ground in 8. So what were some of the others that we gained ground in that didn't deserve the so-called gold star?
Cost of doing business is one that we actually made some traction in. We're still higher than the national average. New England as a whole is higher than the national average, but Maine did come down in the cost of doing business, which, as we know, is a critical factor for the businesses that are already here and businesses that may be looking to relocate or expand here. One that we actually did gain some ground on, but still received a red flag, was 4th grade reading scores. This indicator has been in the report for 3 or 4 years now. It's received a red flag each year because of its critical importance. It's a reliable indicator of how we're doing in our early childhood investment, which we know has a strong return on investment for later outcomes, and it's a surprisingly reliable predictor of future outcomes in terms of educational attainment, employment, earnings, even incarceration rates. So we actually did make some progress, but we're not near the benchmark. So
how far away are we? I'm curious.
We're at about 37% of 4th graders reading proficient or above. The council's goal is 50%.
Yeah, we are a ways away then.
Yeah, we're trending upwards, but we still have some significant work to do.
What were some of the other areas?
One of the other ones that is a frequent red flag, unfortunately, is R&D investment. The council's benchmark is to be at about 3% of our gross domestic product. Going towards research and development expenditures in all forms. We're at about 1%, and we have been around 1% for the last handful of years.
So was that one that we gained a little bit, or was that one you're now moving into the red flag, the ones that we have a major problem?
It's about even in terms of movement relative to the benchmark, and it's received a red flag for, I believe, the 2nd or 3rd year now.
So does any other come to mind? I'm trying to stay focused on the positive here, that really that our viewers could say, we made gains there, that's going to help our economy grow, that's going to make people feel good, feed into the consumer confidence element?
Well, one that we actually did do somewhat well in is wellness and prevention. We track overweight and obesity rates, which have huge impacts on our productivity, our cost of health care, and associated costs. We made a little bit of headway there. Not really enough to move it out of the red flag section, unfortunately. And it's receiving a red flag, not so much for the performance from last year relative to this year, simply because of its importance overall as a preventative measure that we really need to wrap our hands around.
Let me move you into the red flag. Those, by characterization, are those that we really do need to keep our eye on, place priority on, and try to move the ball forward. You mentioned 2 already, the 4th grade reading scores. And you just mentioned the more recent one about wellness and prevention. Share with our viewers what some of the others were, and at the same time, tell us whether they were repeaters or if they're new. In other words, we're making some gains, but not enough, or we're staying steady, whatever the case may be.
Poverty is an indicator that received a red flag. Again, we measure poverty rates for Maine relative to New England and the U.S., and we also look at poverty rates for children under 18 and children under 5. And poverty is an interesting one because it really is a function of everything we're doing well and not well in the economy. It really is the result of all the other investments that we're either making or not making, and at the same time, it really is a foundational indicator. That and the food insecurity indicator, which we added to the report new this year, really speak to the basic needs of people. And if we can address those, get our arms around those a little bit, we hopefully will create a solid foundation where people can then have better outcomes in terms of educational performance, health status, ultimately earnings and employment.
So that was not a red flagged one, that was just one that was added.
Poverty was a red flag. The food insecurity is new this year, yes.
So what were some of the others that we received red flags in?
The cost of health care is the final red flag. This is one for which we don't have reliable, updated data that will allow us to compare Maine across geographies We have reliable data for Maine itself, but generally within the report we're looking to make a comparison to see how we're stacking up against other states. So the council gave this a red flag because we know it's critically important. We hear it all the time about how important it is to businesses and individuals in the state, but we simply don't have the data to make a really informed commentary on it. So that's something we'll look to explore next year, and the council certainly would advocate the efforts that are needed to get that data.
When you think about the areas that we had red flags in, there's a common thread that's weaved through all of those. You think about it, the poverty, the wellness, the cost of health care. It factors into that whole debate that is extremely important to the state. You mentioned one. I mean, I know you're very protective, I guess that's a word, and it should be. You don't want to change the indicators every year because then that lack of predictability or consistency becomes the issue. Yep. So you've maintained that 27. Over the course of time, I suspect, like this year, you mentioned food insecurity. I want you to explain to our audience what that really means, but also one that's near and dear to us because of our recent Making Maine Work report dealing with the workforce. The other one they added, and you also dropped one this year as well. Could you talk about those three and the reason behind each of them?
Certainly, yeah. The food insecurity one, the council was interested in. We brought in an expert to speak to the council, and the council was interested in it in and of itself, but also because of the impacts on other sectors of the economy. So what we learned is that it's high in Maine. It's higher than
what is food insecurity?
It's we do it by household, tracked by household from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it's essentially measuring the access to affordable, nutritious food.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily counting calories per se.
Right.
It's a little different than hunger, but it's access to nutritious food as well. And essentially, if folks have access to affordable, nutritious food, they're going to perform a lot better throughout life than folks that do not have that access. So that's something. What we learned is it's a lot cheaper to address the problem of food insecurity than it is to try to address the outcomes of food insecurity.
Prevention versus cure.
Exactly.
The other one.
Yep, workforce, which, as you mentioned, is near and dear to our heart, and the council was very, very pleased to include that in the report this year and bring it the attention that it deserves. The notion behind that is simply that for Maine's economy to grow, we need more people with more diversity of skills in the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
One way to get there is to simply bump up the quantity. So that's reaching out to populations that are already here in Maine that aren't participating to the full extent that they might be able within the workforce, and it's bringing in additional workers as well as keeping our own folks here.
You're going to be surprised when I tell you I have 1 minute left, and I wish I had much more. But the one you dropped, what was that?
It was population of service center communities. It was measuring the percent of population that lives in areas designated as service centers versus folks that live beyond that. And it was looking at the associated costs in terms of sewer lines, school infrastructure, roadway infrastructure that was associated with that. What we found was the data just essentially wasn't changing. It had kind of leveled off over the last few years. We weren't sure what the policy recommendations would be around that. So it was deemed to not quite have the weight that it should have to be in the report.
Well, this is very helpful and very informative for our public. And I guess my remaining question in 30 seconds is, State Chamber of Commerce, other associations, the business community or otherwise, what do we do with the information? What's your advice in terms of going forward?
Well, it's presented to the legislature and the governor's office every year. The council does carefully weigh all the indicators. We think these are the 27 most important indicators that we as a state should collectively focus our effort on. Some of it is left to policymakers. Many of them certainly organizations like the Chamber, local municipalities, local rotaries, even individuals can take action to impact on, and we certainly would advocate that to move Maine's economy.
Well, you've certainly given us a roadmap, and as we all know, if you don't know where you're headed, any pathway will do. Here we know what needs to be done, and I thank you for helping us to share that with the public. We're going to be right back, and we're going to continue to look at some economic initiatives that's helping to grow our state and our state's economy. So please stay tuned.
Providing better transportation options, helping businesses open their doors on time, improving infrastructure, and creating innovative energy solutions. VHB has been dedicated to our Maine clients for over 30 years, and we've enjoyed partnering with our clients in Maine so much that we moved here to enhance our service delivery. If your business is looking for exceptional technical capabilities, responsive service, and a passion for excellence, contact VHB today.
Welcome back to The Bottom Line. My name is Dana Connors, and on this part of the show, I'm pleased to welcome Brian Whitney, who is the Director of Business Development and Innovation for Department of Economic Community Development.
Yeah.
Welcome, Brian.
Thanks,
Great to
Dan.
have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I don't know if you heard much of the previous interview, but I know you're on the Economic Growth Council, and I failed to mention earlier that it is both a public and private entity that really does help us shepherd things. I know you sit on that, so those issues have to be important to you as Director of Business Development because they touch the very things that you need to help promote us and to grow the state. There are 2 or 3 things in that vein that I'd love to have you share with our audience today. And the first is what I heard you speak, and you did a very nice job, by the way, with our Chamber of Commerce executives. And we got together about a week ago, and you spoke to the governor's open for business idea that he shared in his State of the State address. And I must say, what I read in the media was a little different than what I heard you speak to that day, and I think there's some confusion around it. So let's start at the beginning. What is Open for Business all about?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, Dana. Thanks for having me. There has been a fair amount of misinformation in the press and bandied about. But I think the governor's proposal basically is based on the concept that a sound economic strategy includes both small and large businesses. We obviously want to continue to grow the businesses that we have here, but we also want to try to attract businesses to replace some of the jobs that have been lost in key industries in our state. For example, we got some rather unsettling news recently out of Pittsfield.
Yes.
300 jobs are going to be lost. Those jobs are going to be going, from what we're told, to places like Mexico, China, and North Carolina. So we want to try to attract businesses to replace those kind of positions in our state. And the governor's Open for Business Zone proposal is his effort to try to do that. So what does it do? So the governor is contemplating these 2 zones in Brunswick at the former Naval Air Station and Limestone at the former Air Force Base there.
Which is a distinction different than I read. When I first read it, it was any place and almost every place.
Exactly, yeah. This, like I said, there's been a lot of misinformation. So we're talking about 2 zones, so Brunswick and Limestone, and both of those facilities have great infrastructure, large airports, vast space and land, and they also have large commercial buildings that are largely vacant right now.
Yeah.
So the governor is offering a package of incentives to try to drive development to those 2 areas. So the incentives include a whole host of different things, I think 8 different components, starting with tax incentives. As you know, we've got the Pine Tree Development Zone program, and the state offers tax incentives to Maine businesses. This basically makes that program a little bit more robust. Currently, Pine Tree Zone benefits accrue for 10 years. The governor's proposal offers making those 20-year benefits to help try to drive some of the large employers to come to Maine. So those are corporate income tax credits, sales tax exemptions, and employment tax increment financing benefits, which basically is a long word for reimbursing some of the employee withholdings that are paid to the state back to the business. Yeah. So they would get a percentage of all those types of things. So those would be pretty important benefits to businesses. The next thing that we hear, and I'm sure you hear it too as we're out talking to businesses, is that Maine has high energy costs. We don't do as good a job perhaps as we could with workforce training investments, and it's also difficult to access capital here in Maine. So the governor's tried to propose a solution in this proposal to address those areas. On the energy front, Maine's got pretty high electric rates. we do okay compared to our New England neighbors,
Right.
but nationally we don't do very well. So the governor is proposing to reimburse these businesses in these two zones. And an important aspect that I've left out of this is the threshold for qualifying for these benefits is the business has to create at least 1,500 jobs and has to make at least $50 million in investment.
Yeah.
So that's the threshold for qualification for either of these two zones. So businesses that comply with those requirements would be offered an exemption, a reimbursement for any electric rate, any electric costs over and above the average industrial rate that's published by the U.S. Energy Information Administration. I think currently the average industrial rate's about 6.8.
Right.
Maine's rate's about 8.3. So the businesses that qualify into this program would be entitled to a reimbursement for those excess costs on an annual basis. The bill also has a training component in it where the Commissioner of the Department of Labor and the Commissioner of my department, Economic Development, would work across state government to marshal resources from all the agencies that provide training and skill development, and there are quite a few of them outside of just these two departments. So they would marshal resources to make sure the businesses had the training resources that they need, and business attraction or job attraction resources to make sure that they get the necessary workers for these jobs.
The one hot potato in the whole, using my familiar county term, hot potato, is the right to work concept. I mean, that seemed to capture a lot of space in terms of reporting on this. Not that you created the message, but it was there nevertheless. But that right to work is really applicable once again to the same areas, the Loring and the Brunswick Landing, that right to work is applicable only to those two sites.
That's correct.
If they meet the threshold.
Right, so they have to meet the job and investment thresholds. They have to be located in those two areas. And if they do, then the employees cannot be compelled to join a labor organization as a condition of employment. And they can't be compelled to pay labor fees or dues as a condition of employment. So that's the right to work piece. As you said, it's only those two areas. It's only applicable to those businesses that meet those job thresholds. So I think it has been blown out of proportion in the media a little bit. So.
You mentioned the opportunity zones, Pine Tree zones, I should say. Is that this seems to mirror it, but take it higher in terms of its rewards. It doesn't. Your proposal, the governor's proposal, doesn't replace Pine Tree zones. So Pine Tree zones are still available to businesses throughout the state, which our whole state now is eligible for the benefits if they meet those thresholds. So what this is it builds upon the Pine Tree zone concept. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Almost Pine Tree zones on steroids or something like that.
Yeah, I've heard it characterized like that. But the Pine Tree program will continue to exist. I think it sunsets in 2018, so those benefits will continue to be available to businesses. And, I think it's important to note that we do a pretty good job in the state fostering small businesses and growing small businesses here. And I think that's evidenced by the 130,000 micro-enterprises we have in Maine. And those folks create about 170,000 of the jobs here. But what we don't do a great job is attracting those larger businesses. I think currently we have about 13 businesses in the state that have more than 1,500 employees. So what the governor's trying to do is make the economy a little more balanced by attracting some more of those large businesses. And his incentive package is trying to get us into the conversation when these kind of projects are bandied about nationally.
Two other areas that I don't think time is going to really allow me to get into to the extent that I'd like, but maybe we can touch upon them. One is you've just completed an analysis of our tax incentive programs. In spite of what some people may think, I'm sure it's as clear to you as it is to me, we're not robust when it comes to incentives. And certainly there's nothing wrong in reviewing them from time to time, but we also want to maintain those that work well and the predictability so that those that work well are utilized because they have value. Without getting into a long explanation, because time doesn't allow it, What did you find in that comprehensive incentive analysis that shows that something is working well? What are the 2 or 3 that you could point to that says, you know what, these have real value propositions to grow our economy?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, our consultants did a cost-benefit analysis of our existing programs, and 2 of the programs I know you're very familiar with, Pine Tree Development Zones for one, and the Business Equipment Tax Reimbursement Program for another, are 2 programs that actually the cost-benefit analysis showed are worthy investments and that the state gets a good return on those.
Yeah.
There was difficulty in assessing some of the other programs at the state level because of access to confidential tax data.
Exactly. Yeah.
But by and large, those 2 programs really showed quite well. And in June, there'll be another report coming out that'll more comprehensively compare Maine to other states in terms of our program mix.
Yeah, that's good. In the minute and a half we've got left, there's one other thing that I confess I was not familiar with, and it's the magazine that you have put out. You put out one. It's extremely well done, in my opinion. The title of it, and I'm sure it's going to be shown on the screen, is Maine Economic Development, a World-Class Economy. Maine attracts global investment. Great stories throughout that highlight some of the valuable things that we have going for us and some of the businesses that are really doing well, and I applaud you for that. Can you share with our viewers a bit about what this is intended to do? It's obviously great promotion. Is it about business attraction or consumer confidence or all of the above?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. It's principally a business attraction piece.
Yeah.
Once again, to try to lure some of these businesses from out of state into Maine. And so it does tell a great story about Maine's economic assets, our infrastructure, our educational institutions, our workforce, which is legendary nationally. And it pulls all those facts and information together in this book. It lays it out with great pictures and narratives, and really, I think, does a good job portraying Maine as a place to park some investment.
Oh, I think it's great work, and we cannot do enough to market the things that we know that are so special about the state. Short of telling people, others are allowed to form their own impression, and it doesn't always work as well as we'd like. So let me close by simply thanking you for being on the show and commend you for your efforts, and knowing you for as long as I do, that I know you're hardworking and very sincere and got a tough job, but we appreciate what you're doing, buddy.
Well, thanks, Dan. I have a great respect for you and your organization as well.
Thanks
so much.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, today we followed the economic development trail, looked at how to grow Maine's economy, and frankly, my final thoughts continue on that same theme. We mentioned it a couple times in today's program, Making Maine Work series. Well, it was about 2 months ago that we devoted our program to our latest in the series of publications looking at issues challenging our state. This time it was the challenges of our workforce, to grow our workforce. More specifically, not so much the skills. We'll address that in our next one, but this time it was a supply. How many people do we have? We can't grow our economy if we don't grow our workforce. We know that between now and 2020, we are already the oldest state in the nation when it comes to our workforce. Our birth rate is low, and we're going to lose our baby boomers, 200,000 of them. By 2020, we predict 20,000 people will be less in our workforce than exists today. Our Making Maine Work come up with a number of recommendations: attracting young, attracting foreign workers, utilizing underutilized people that are available to us today. I want to talk just a second about one of those, our people with disabilities. We have more people with disabilities in our state than the national average, but fewer that are employed. A wonderful, promising return. I encourage you to take a look at this population, to reach out to us as a state chamber. It's extremely rewarding, very promising, and I can tell you this, it's a compassionate thing to do, but it's an economic imperative that we do it. I thank you for watching Bottom Line. Look forward to seeing you back here next month as we continue to look at those bottom line issues confronting our state. Until then, have a wonderful month, and thank you.